To whoever reads this book, listens to this book, or ingests this book in any form, I thank you sincerely and truly. I would like to set my intention in your mind, just in case it does not exactly come off like this to you. I have experienced many things in this life. I have been repeatedly grief-stricken for one reason or another for the last 11 years. I've been homeless, happy, destitute, depressed, thriving, struggling, living, breathing, in love, in lust, jealous, envious, and every other possible feeling in the spectrum of human emotions. When my mother was sick and suffering from ovarian cancer, I was entering high school. My high school was always looked at as one of the best around, and my mother was so proud of me for getting into it. My older cousin went, but she did not finish there, and my uncle went there as well. I could neither understand nor fathom what she was experiencing. I remember ambulances being called a few times, tubes going in and around her, and how much she seemed to hurt after her chemotherapy appointments. She went into the hospital for a routine checkup in 2008 and never came out. I came right back to school after she passed, and for the next 4 years, I suppressed how badly I was suffering and not allowing myself to properly grieve until it would just come to a head and burst. Along the way, I encountered more family and close friends also passing, and somewhat learned from what I went through before. I allowed myself to cry and think about them as much as I needed and wanted to. I'm a very studious person, and I do a lot of research on anything I am interested in. I began to actually realize how much I had been traumatized by the things that I experienced and began to try to write out how I felt more and more. Often in my life have I been the ears, shoulder, arm, or any other part of the body that someone can lean on. It was not often reciprocated, but I understand that people can't always empathize. Even though they didn't necessarily always understand me, I began to feel better by just talking to someone about some of my past. So that is why I'm here, to continue to work out how I feel in the most honest and truest way that I know how. I am hoping that you would think of talking to someone, professional or otherwise, about your trauma. Because just because something happened some years ago doesn't mean it isn't still affecting you. I am a procrastinator. I had a long time between wanting to finally put this book together and actually doing so. I kept writing things I thought would go better in this, even after deciding on 27 poems. 27 poems in a book released on the 27th of October, being my 27th birthday, is great in alignment But I think I love the sentiment of releasing it on or near my mother's birthday a bit more, so that's what I've decided on instead. For reference, her birthday is November 3rd. This book was originally published digitally on the 4th. I am a lover. I am more in love now than I have ever been. And only now can I truly begin to express how much of a detriment love was and is on my life and livelihood. I believe in astrology, vibrations, energy, crystals, and the like. Water themes scattered throughout some of my poems are motifs based on my sign, the almighty Scorpio, and just seem to flow naturally to me to use and to reference. The most important thing to know is that I consider myself a very emotional man. All of my feelings are always amplified. This leads to extreme highs and the deepest and most bitter lows. This first low is the backbone of why I became so invested into writing as my primary form of expression. My mother was a very talented writer. One of the next books after this one will be a book of her works. Her profession was a nurse, though, and she lived her life to help people. She was the middle child of 7 children that my grandmother had, and looked after all of her siblings, both younger and older. I lost my mother to that same ovarian cancer I referenced before, as well as her mother and my father's father, all in 2008. I met my grandfather that year. Though I had not known him before that, he attended my mother's funeral to show support for my dad and I. It was probably just what he felt was right to do, but I will always be grateful for that. I had an uncle that was much like a father to me. He made sure my mother, grandmother, and I were never of a need or want, as long as it was within his power. His name was Eric Morrison. His children are a few years older than I am, and were and are much like siblings for myself and my cousin that is also my age. As hard as 2008 hit me, 2017 hit me even deeper, resulting in becoming an adult orphan. And now only having my father's mother left of people that contributed to my existence and birth. My dad was a loving and caring man. He loved to fish and to read comic books. He was serious about his family, just like my mother was about hers. He was hilarious and very easy to talk to. He loved to mimic Michael James McDonald's Stewart character from Mad TV, and his love for comic books transferred into my love for not only comic books, but cartoons and anime as well. He and my mother had worked at the same nursing home together because he, just like her, liked to help people. This manifested a bit differently for him later, as he would work as a handyman and help people with their houses and spaces. I was terrified at the diagnosis of hearing cancer yet again. He passed away from pancreatic cancer in 2017, a few months before my mother's father passed away. My 2018 was spent trying to do everything I could to not acknowledge how much pain I was in. Every year up to that point, I always cried and was majorly depressed on the anniversaries of birth and death for everyone I still mourned and grieved for. But this time, it was different. I was alone. This first poem, of the 27 of them that there are, is very important to me. Well, they're all very important, but this one in particular marked now being called an adult orphan. Sounds crazy, right? Time eternal. Time stops for none and passes all. Time makes you wish you'd been more involved. But time will always go on, leaving love behind. But knowing that those moments will still stay alive and become the bonds of which they share with others. With time, I've missed cousins, friends, mothers. With time, did that pain slowly decline? Less on those days do those tears stream by. More of the time, I recall all of our fun. And sometimes I wonder, as I see our son, is there more than this time? Is there a time for us all? Is there a time that our past ones can give us a call? Before I give you the next poem, I'm going to tell you a small and short story. Okay, so I am an amateur genealogist. A genealogist is a family historian. And how I came upon genealogy and the interest in the first place had to do with my mother. The next year after she passed away in 2008, that next year being 2009, I was tasked with sorting through her possessions. Her and my grandmother both kept quite a few things. My grandmother had items that belonged to or referenced some of my uncles and my aunt even. My mother had things that belonged to or referenced my older brother. I've never used half to reference my brother or my sister, though we only have one of the same parent each. But that is the reality. My older brother is just that, older, and my brother. The half part is unnecessary to me. But there was a small notebook. This notebook was shaped like, I would say, maybe a child's t-shirt. And in the front page of this notebook was a family tree. My mother created this family tree with my brother maybe 15 or 20 years before I would ever see this. So, on one side of the tree is my brother's father and his family. On the other side of the tree was our mother's family. This tree went back to the great-great-grandparents of my brother and I. And it was more or less fleshed out. But there were some holes, some gaps, and things of that nature. When I saw this, it intrigued me because though I had known my mother and grandmother all of my life, their history wasn't that apparent to me. I was curious as a child, and children ask questions, but I never asked enough questions once I saw this. And now that I would never be able to ask either one of them any questions ever again, I had to hope that the rest of the family would be receptive to the things that I pondered and wondered. I mean, for a while, I was the youngest person in the family. And even when that was no longer the case, upon my brother having children, I still was a bit younger than the rest of my generation. I was completely ignorant of how much strife and turmoil there was just seemingly lingering on the surface. Both of my parents' fathers had other families, other women, other situationships, and I'm not sure as much about how it affected my mother, but my father was deeply affected the very first time I ever heard him refer to his father in any way, shape, or form. With so much loss in the same year, I felt as if a hole was burrowing deeper and deeper in my chest. I was going to have to find a way to deal with what had happened and how that would affect the future from there on. So I began to research these names listed on this family tree that Mama put together for me. Well, not for me, but you know what I mean. This eventually led to getting to know many members of my immediate family that always lived in Cincinnati that I never met, and getting to know my extended families, nuclear families, all of the families, everywhere, all over the United States. All of those things came about from this book. It came about from the love that I hold for the family I already knew and for any family that I should meet. My viewpoint is that the ancestors want their descendants to be together, no matter how far removed your connection is. If you can prove to me that we're related, I'll love you just like I love the rest of my family. Bonds became very important to me. They had always been important to me, but now I was finding more and more people with the same history as myself. People and things I didn't have permission to learn about before. I could now do so on my own. And it was liberating, to say the least. When I began and continued my research, much of the family on all sides was curious about the outcome. And I felt such pride to be able to relay these stories about our immediate and extended family and ancestors. I love it. I really, really do. It made me feel like a messenger of sorts, that I would be the descendant that would come along and speak life into their name once more and tell their stories to people who never could have met them. Very little in this world mean as much to me as my family. I love you all, always. My family ties. Few things mean as much as my family ties. I live for who's around and for those who've died. I impart the stories of our past shared glory, much like the people that came before me. I form connections and bonds with those unseen, that I now know by name who came to form me. I want to meet everyone in my family tree. My hope is that you'll want to meet me. The pain of reality. She cried out to me from a distant reality, hoping I could answer the call. The television played. In a bed she laid when someone called my name. Until then, she had slept for several days, but responded to the call. She went back to sleep to never wake up and left me with only her love.